Subramanian and part of the Gearing Sabancı University team. We are very excited to host this event. Well, we were looking very much forward to hosting you in Istanbul, seeing everyone face to face, walking around the city together. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it, but as we have seen in the past months, well, almost a year now, the digital world opens up new possibilities. There have been close to there have been close to 1,000 registrations to this conference for different days, and it would have been impossible to bring together such a wide international group face-to-face, so we're happy. It's our first digital conference of this scale, and we're trying our best with an amazing group of people to run everything smoothly, but please excuse any problems that may arise. We will try and solve them immediately. You can write to our colleague, friend who's named as help desk as one of the participants if you're having a problem. Before I go on to introducing our speakers, I want to make a few reminders, which you're also seeing on the screen at the moment. We have simultaneous translation available throughout the conference. If you understand both English and Turkish and want to listen to everything in its original language, you don't have to do anything. If you want to listen to the English language translation, please select English from the interpretation menu, which is the world icon that is on the lower right corner of Zoom. And please pick the Korean channel if you want to listen to the Turkish translation. Turkish translation will be on the Korean channel. Değerli konuklar, konferansımızda simultane çeviri yapılmaktadır. Konuşmaları Türkçe çeviri olarak dinlemek isterseniz lütfen sağ alttaki dünya işaretinden üzerinde interpretation yazıyor, Korece'yi seçin. The conference is being video recorded. It is broadcasted live on YouTube. We will also be sharing video clips afterwards. Your cameras, some of yours have already been turned off to prevent overloading on the internet. If you wish to remain anonymous, you can also change your names. And dear speakers, let us remind you to please add your institutions and titles if you wish to your Zoom name. All microphones are off at the moment. Please write your questions using the chat box. Well, welcome again to the second annual conference of the Gearing Roles project hosted by the Sabancı University Gender and Women Studies Center of Excellence, SUGender. Gearing Roles, Gender Equality Actions in Research Institutions to Transform Gender Roles, is designing, implementing, and monitoring 6 gender equality plans at European higher education and research institutions. Our project is funded by the European Commission as part of the Science with and for Society program. Our first conference was last year in Lisbon, hosted by our colleagues at the University of Lisbon Institute of Geography and Spatial Planning. The third conference, the next conference, will be in Estonia next November to be hosted by the Estonian Research Council. Well, this year's theme is gender and leadership. And without further ado, let me invite our first speaker, Athanasia Mongu, Policy Officer at the European Commission, Directorate General for Research and Innovation, to give her welcome speech. We are grateful to have her here. Thank you very much, Athanasia. The floor is yours now.
Sorry, I just realized that I was muted. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I have prepared a couple of slides, not to bother you. Is it? I'm sorry. Okay, here it is. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So I really like also the title of the conference, the title of the conference today, which is about gender and leadership in higher education and research. And with this, I would just like to give you a very brief overview of the current policy context at the European Union level. So, for example, we know that gender equality is very high on the agenda of the new leadership. We also have, which is also reflected at the very high political level. We have a new commissioner even for equality for the first time. And we also have Maria Gabriel, who is the Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth. And just a very brief overview of gender equality in the European research area, which was one of the priorities under the communication that was adopted back in 2012. So back from then, gender equality and gender mainstreaming in research was one of the priorities, and we had 3 objectives. You know that those were to have gender equality in scientific careers at all levels, having gender balance in decision-making bodies, and of course, integrating the gender dimension in research and innovation content. So since then, we had one common approach, which was to achieve institutional change. So that means that the goal was to fix the system and not just the numbers. And if we have a look at the latest data from the She Figures publication, which is one of the flagship publications of the European Commission, we can see that there is still quite some room for improvement. For example, when we have a look at PhD graduate level, we can see that there is even parity between women and men. There is a parity between women and men. There is women make up 48%, but then as we go higher in the academic ladder, we can see that the gender gap is becoming wider. For instance, top-level researchers at grade A positions, which is the equivalent of full professorship positions, women make up only 24% of the total workforce. And of course, this also applies for women authors, which women authors make only 32%. And if we even talk about the women inventors and that register for patent publications, the numbers are even lower. That means that we're even at less than 10%. So we have made quite some progress up to now, but we still see that there is quite some room for improvement. So all of these, now the previous months, they were quite busy in terms of new actions, and we had a recent communication of the European research area that was adopted at the end of September, where we have a new action for gender equality to strengthen the European research and innovation potential. So we had a specific action calling the Commission to propose as of the next year, as of 2021, the development of inclusive gender equality plans with member states and stakeholders, which is also you, in order to promote EU gender equality in research and innovation. So that means that the gender equality plans that the European Commission has been funding for quite some time now will become an eligibility criterion for Horizon Europe applicants, and this will concern public bodies, research organizations, and secondary and higher education institutions. And just to say that this action is also fully in line with the ambition of the new European Commission's gender equality strategy that will be implemented until 2025. And for the first time, it was mentioned the possibility for Horizon Europe applicants needing to have a gender equality plan into place. What I also wanted to say is that when we talk about inclusiveness, inclusive gender equality plans, first of all, we mean we want to have geographic inclusiveness in the sense that we leave no one behind. We want all the countries to be eligible to apply. We also need to have to open up to intersections, to consider social categories that may be as a basis for discrimination, such as taking into account sexual orientation, disabilities, and we also need to be inclusive in the sense that we also need to have the private sector on board. So there needs to be synergies between research, academia, and the private sector and entrepreneurship. And we have been in full consultation and full co-creation mode with our projects, like gearing roles and other relevant stakeholders that helped us define what should be the minimum building blocks that each gender equality plan should entail. So for this, we decided and we all work together to see that, for example, a gender equality plan needs to be a public document. That means that it has to be a formal document that is signed by the top management. And of course, it has to be published on the institution's website and be disseminated within the whole institution. There need to be dedicated resources for a gender equality plan. That means that there needs to be earmarked funding. And of course, we need to have data collection and monitoring. We have been trying to push to have more sex and gender disaggregated data across all staff categories in Europe, because this also to give us a better understanding of what is happening. For example, there also needs to be annual reporting of gender imbalances and having a comprehensive evaluation approach. And as a final building block, we have training and capacity building to tackle, for instance, unconscious gender bias among staff and decision makers. This can also be some training in terms of unconscious bias and to tackle discrimination and gender stereotypes. This is just a very brief overview of what has been happening for the past years and what is also new to come for Horizon Europe, the next framework program for research and innovation. I would also like to invite you to check regularly the updates that we have on our policy page on gender equality. And finally, I would also like to tell you that the GEAR tool, which stands for Gender Equality in Academia and Research, that was co-developed by IGE and DG Research and Innovation, provides step-by-step guidance for implementing gender equality plans in research organizations. And it's currently being updated. You can also have a look at this QR code where you can also find more examples, concrete examples on best practices that actually build on the projects that have been funded under FP7 and Horizon 2020 projects like gearing roles. And of course, if you have any other questions, you can always contact us at RTD genderinresearch@ec.europa.eu. And for this, I will stop sharing my screen, and I'm looking forward to the next discussions that we will have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Athanasia Mongo. Thanks for coming. Thanks for this brief overview of the policies, and it's very exciting to hear about what's coming next. Our next speaker is Meltem Müftülerbaş. Meltem Müftülerbaş is the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Professor of International Relations, and Jean Monnet Chair at Personam at Sabancı University. We're honored to have her welcome you to this conference on gender and leadership as a prominent women leader herself. Thank you, Professor Müftülerbaş. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gülru. That's very kind. I'm very happy to be here, of course. And I'm, beyond the fact that, I'm a female researcher myself, to be, involved in such an important project in providing some kind of, let's say, at least, an example, a model for the younger generation is critical. Now, before I go, further with regards to what I want to say about, our institution and the way that, our own leadership looks into the way that women researchers play in universities, let me share a few points that I would like to stress that maybe we can actually continue discussing during the rest of the conference as well. Now, since we are discussing research and the way that female researchers play a role in the larger European research area, there are pros and cons into the way that we can actually conceptualize this issue. And this is something that I always tell my own PhD students, that most of the academic career, well, all of the academic career steps that we actually take are very much driven by our research activities. And unlike other types of work, like in banking or in the political sector, what we do in research is generally invisible and unrelated to our gender. What I mean by that is this: when researchers send an article to a journal, once you get through the desk rejection and the editor might know your gender, the referees don't. So this is actually to have this type of an anonymity, or to be rather genderless in the research community. Once you send your articles, your research to these outlets, is actually a blessing of some kind. But it's also a blessing it becomes a blessing once you can actually come to that stage. What I mean by that is this: Anastasia's talk, Athanasia's talk, has stressed some of the points as well. But what is important is not actually when you look at the number of publications or the way that female researchers could get their outputs recognized. Female researchers' submissions themselves are low. That's because the burden or the types of things that women researchers or non-binary researchers do is a bit different than let's say a male researcher does. And to give you a direct example from let's say my life, I'm also married to a male academic for the past 27 years. The way that he can put together his papers and then send them off, and the way that the time that I have to do the same thing is a bit different, because a lot of things that a female researcher has to take care of, normally a male researcher does not have the same responsibility or the same feeling of involvement. Now, that doesn't mean that my partner is not contributing. No, it just means that, and in a lot of households, that's not the case at all. So what actually this means is that the articles that women researchers are able to write has a it has a restriction with regards to the time that is available to them. So this is something important for me in the way that I'm evaluating all the researchers at our faculty. And I'm also looking at, for example, if a male researcher is able to send off, let's say, 5 papers in a year, normally a female researcher is able to do that only half of that. That's because of the burdens that we actually carry, that involves taking care of people, that involves child raising, that involves everything that that you need to think about in running your daily life as well. So I think there is, and this is something that's important even further now, because the pandemic has already created a situation that women researchers are now doing so much stuff at home that they're even more disadvantaged had there been no pandemic. And the repercussions of that we will see in a few years' time. So it's no coincidence that while their work is becoming less intense, we also see a number of other in other sectors, women dropping out of the workforce in its entirety. So that in return means that we need actually leadership, well, specifically either female leadership or leadership that could actually recognize the obstacles and the hardships that women researchers are facing, both in normal life without the pandemic, but now together with the pandemic as well. Again, to give another example here from our university, we are encountering a very different work environment. And that actually means that work has now become a 24/7 occupation. I'm receiving emails at 1 o'clock in the morning, which requires responses in about 6 or 7 hours. So one of the things that I try to do, I just became the dean 3 months ago, is this: I tell the upper management that any email that I receive after 6 o'clock, I might read it. I might actually have the answer for it too, but I will not going to answer it immediately until the next day. More importantly, I also tell them that when they try to contact my own administrative staff here, I have 6 people who are working in our faculty with me, and they're all they're all women. And I tell them that if you want to get a response from them at 12 o'clock at night, you need to ask my permission first. Now, this is something that is completely new to some people, because they are accustomed to sending, I mean, this is also in the European context, something different, because in the in EU countries, you are not supposed to send work-related stuff after 6 o'clock, after the actual work is supposedly over, whereas at our institution, or in our culture, also in the American culture too, work is continuous. And to have this continuity in work, and we actually, the way that we try to do work is also continuous, but I think it's detrimental to specifically women researchers, because they have to balance out so many things all at the same time. And that also creates this expectation. If you're unable to keep up with that, then you're not actually, productive. That brings this automatic, unexpected result that, you receive an email at 11 o'clock, and if you don't respond by 11:30, you're not taking your work seriously. So this is something that I'm trying to change as part of the work culture here. But I think it's also part of the way that academia has also worked over the years, not only with the work and life balance that I'm trying to stress, but also with the fact that there is not a recognition of the so many details that women are expected to take care of, without considering its impact on their actual scientific output. Now, there are already certain rules that the European Commission has adopted. Some of the scientific councils that we have in Turkey are doing that as well. They're adding this extra year to women's research performance if they have had kids, but only having 1 year added, I think, means nothing, because once you have children, once you have, it doesn't even have to be children, women are also taking care of their elderly parents as well. The whole expectation of what women generally do is not reflected onto their research evaluations. So that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges in the way that men and women perform differently in academia. And that's also one of the probably underlying reasons why we see less women as you go up in the upper ranks of academia, because of the magnitude of the work that they have to do. A lot of them drop out during the process. So graduate school, when you look at graduate students, you actually see more or less an equal distribution, at least in certain fields, maybe not in STEM fields. But as they move out of the graduate school and move, try to get into academia, that actually changes. And you've seen Athanasia's figures as well. In the Turkish case, it is less so, but nonetheless, there are large similarities. So this conference, therefore, I think, is a very important turning point, at least, to discuss some of these underlying issues that we normally take for granted, and these underlying issues that have created these deep divisions within the academic world, within the scientific world as well, on a gender-based differentiation that requires significant action to be taken at the leadership level to make a lot of the academic policies, scientific research evaluation, performance criteria, let's say, more gender friendly. I don't like the word gender friendly that much, but that's just what I try to, I think it conveys the message. So, I'm very hopeful that we will be finding new alternatives, and at least have this dialogue among ourselves that we could actually take into a more action-oriented plan as well. So this project's, one of the end results is this project is going to produce this gender action equality plan, for which a number of steps have already been taken at our institution and the participating institutions, is actually a right step towards that direction. So that's all I have to say. And I wish all of us a very fruitful conference and lots of good ideas to come out from this 3-day conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meltem Müftülerbaş, for joining us and for this very insightful speech and for reminding us about the gendered effects of the pandemic on women researchers, especially. Well, as I said before, the conference is hosted by the Sabancı University Gender and Women's Studies Center of Excellence, SUGender. I now invite Hülya Adak, the director of SUGender and faculty member in Cultural Studies and Gender Studies at Sabancı University, to give her welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Guru, for the introduction. Dear colleagues, fellow activists, teachers, trainers, students, I'd like to welcome you all to the online international conference, Gender and Leadership in Higher Education and Research Institutions. I would like to thank our Dean, Meltem Müftülerbaş, for the wonderful speech. And I've been the director of SUGender for the past year, and I can tell you all that our lives and our tasks have become much easier after first Ayşe Kadul, of course, but then Meltem Müftülerbaş took over leadership in our faculty. As the current SUGender director and a scholar who spent roughly 2 decades at Sabancı University, I'd like to articulate a few words about SUGender and where we stand, and the road leading to the Gearing Roles Horizon 2020 project that my colleagues Ayşe Kadul, Altınay, Guru Göker, and İlayda Eceova launched roughly 2 years ago at Sabancı University. Since the early and humble beginnings of the Cultural Studies program in the early 2000s at Sabancı, gender was a very important component, both of in-class teaching and of activism outside the classroom. The many 8th of March International Women's Days panels, film screenings, discussions, our very own feminist play on women's sexuality that was published in 2 languages, in Turkish and German, İşte Böyle Güzelim, So Ist Das Meine Schöne, which we're also planning to publish in English, in the early years of our university led to a nationwide project, a gender and sexuality training program for high school teachers all over Turkey that was also certified by the Ministry of Education for extensive periods of time. This project, this program called the Purple Certificate Program, was an offshoot and a continuation of a UNJP project. And at Sabancı, it developed into an amazing program for sharing experiences and working in an interdisciplinary fashion. For the past 13 years, the program has been persistently supported by the Sabancı Foundation, and we're actually making the program grow into a program that embraces more and more high school teachers and continues in online form during the COVID crisis. In 2007, together with incentives from student organizations on campus and grassroots organization at the university level, a group of scholars and administrators from all disciplines and units wrote up Sabancı University's sexual harassment policy. This was the first policy of its kind in institutions of higher education in Turkey. The Sexual Harassment Committee has worked diligently for the past 13 years to struggle against all forms of discrimination and to construct an environment of gender equality, anti-discrimination, inclusion, and pluralism. Our efforts to continue building this environment ensued in the establishment of the Gender Forum first, and later SUGender, a center of excellence for gender and women's studies. Together with this amazing Horizon 2020 project, you know, the conference of which we're a part of right now, we have 2 other ongoing Horizon projects, a number of Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships, Coast Action Networks, Newton projects funded through the British Academy, exclusively under the center. The research and outreach projects span the fields of women's, gender, and sexuality studies, as well as migration studies, memory and trauma studies, literature, performance, and film studies, and medical anthropology and disability studies. We are trying to move into the direction of climate justice with new projects and new training programs. Besides the many activist projects, such as the Purple Certificate Program, transformative activism constructed around self-healing tools for activists, and curious steps, which you might have actually sort of heard a discussion, a panel of, our gender and memory walks. We also have a multitude of awards at the graduate and postdoctoral levels that we give to scholars engaged in gender and sexuality studies. Our work has taken a new spin with the Gearing Roles project, in that together with our team's efforts, Ayşe, İlayda, and Guru, we have started transforming the culture of Sabancı University as an institution. Since the project favors a bottoms-up approach, our internal gender task forces, made up of a heterogeneous group of administrators, instructors, scholars alike, have come up with a myriad of different ideas and action plans that will contribute to an overall gender action plan for the entire university. This has been revolutionary, and this project serves to fulfill the mission of our center. Rather than remaining a center that operates marginally and independently of the university, we're dedicated to radically transforming the university and the people belonging to this institution. And it's wonderful to see that this transformation will take place as a result of the brainstorming sessions organized under the auspices of the Gearing Roles project, where we came together to think, dream, and move onward toward a more egalitarian future of gender justice. Further, through the international networks we established with Gearing Roles, many international scholars have already contributed and will contribute to our ongoing webinars, such as the famous Sexual Harassment and Gender-Based Violence in Academia series. We thank all who have participated in these webinars, and we hope to publish our discussions and our research on these issues in the near future. Obviously, we're going through a very historic moment right now, and Dean Meltem Müftülerbaş has talked about some of the challenges. We have had a very exciting moment over the weekend through the Biden-Harris victory, and where Harris, in her speech, inaugural speech, poignantly actually mentioned that she might be the first female Black South Asian vice president-elect, but she's certainly not going to be the last. And I think we are on a mission, all of us, to make sure that female leadership, feminist leadership, and diversity becomes the norm for decades to come. But most importantly, what Dean Müftülerbaş was mentioning, the COVID crisis, is something that I hope we'll be able to broach in some of the discussions we're going to have in the next few days. There are obviously serious challenges, serious inequalities, particularly in the field of gender, that arise from the COVID crisis. And they might be resolved by, as our dean said, by thinking about gender-sensitive leadership or female leadership, but we might also be able to come up with alternative models. And I think it would also be great to address new endeavors of solidarity that address these challenges. So I hope these 3 days will be the platform where we engage not only in formulating some of the inequalities, new inequalities that await us, but also some of the good examples and examples of solidarity. So I'd like to thank our Gearing Roles team, Guru, Ayşe, and İlayda, for launching this fascinating project, and I look very much forward to the lectures and vibrant discussions to follow. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much, Hülya Adak. We are also very much looking forward to our discussions today and in the next few days. And dear guests, I now invite our next speaker, Maria Silvestre Cabrera, who's the academic coordinator of the Gearing Roles project. She's a professor of social and human sciences at the University of Deusto, a former dean of the political science and sociology faculties, a former director also of the Basque Institute of Women. She will be giving you a brief introduction about the project and its aims. Thank you, Maria. The floor is yours now.
Thank you, Guru. To Nadine, good afternoon, and thank you very much for attending Gearing Roles' second annual conference, Gender and Leadership in Higher Education and Research, hosted by Sabancı University in Istanbul. I want to thank the assistance of the authorities who are joining us in this institutional panel. It's a real shame that we cannot meet physically in the beautiful city of Istanbul, or visit its precious corners, or savor its gastronomy, but surely This online version will allow us to share, debate, and grow. I'm the responsible for briefly presenting the Green Roles project. Green Roles is a strong multidisciplinary consortium of 10 European academic and non-academic partners. Green Roles is implementing 6 new gender equality plans in 5 European universities: Instituto de Geografía y Ordenamiento del Territorio de la Universidad de Lisboa, Università Ljubljana, Sabancı Universitesi, Oxford Brookes University, University of Deusto, and in the Estonian Research Council, following the steps described in the GEAR tool: define, plan, act, and check, to achieve structural change in JIP implementing institutions with the firm objective of challenging and transforming gender roles and identities linked to professional careers and work towards real institutional change. The JIP implementing partners are supported by 3 non-academic partners: Yellow Window, Trilateral Research, and FECIT as a member of Euraxis, that bring into the consortium key expertise and sound experience. JIP implementing institutions also received the feedback from Radboud University, an experienced university in charge of external project evaluation and impact assessment. Green Roles will contribute to increase the number of European research organizations implementing JIPs, not only by direct implementation, but spreading lessons learned throughout to other research institutions and key stakeholders. Moreover, each consortium member exchanges expertise and disseminates experiences to national networks of other organizations. Green Roles partners contribute to the increase of women participating in research by fostering their career progression through mentoring and training activities, analyzing possibilities for diversifying professional paths, and promoting open, transparent, and merit-based recruitment processes. Our focus is on the deconstruction of sexual roles in order to unveil often unconscious gender biases that operate in processes of decision-making, selection, and promotion of people, and in their attribution of value and recognition. Our main objective is to promote a structural change in 6 JIP implementing research and education institutions through the development of self-tailored action plans. A structural change is both a political and a technical process. It involves new ways of policy making, shifts in organizational and institutional culture, and shifts in behavior of the academic community. Green Roles targets the questioning and transformation of traditional gender roles at the micro, meso, and macro levels, with 3 main objectives related to female career progression: gender mainstreaming in education and research, and leadership and decision-making. This second conference focuses on leadership and decision-making. The purpose is to provide knowledge from institutional and personal experience and detect forms of exercise of power that allow a more equal, diverse, mainstream, and inclusive participation that can help institutions to improve gender equality and representative leadership. I would highlight 2 issues related to leadership. On the one hand, the idea of feminist leadership as a leadership defined by inclusiveness and diversity, as a leadership that seeks social justice. And on the other hand, I think it could be very useful to reflect on resistances to gender equality and its causes, especially from the point of view of those who hold positions and responsibilities. We hope that all of you enjoyed the conference. That should help us to improve the way of facing decision-making attending gender dimension. I want to end by thanking the University of Sabancı for organizing the conference, and especially our colleagues, Ayşe Kadul, Gul Rugoker, and Ilaida Eseova. Thank you, the secular.
Thank you so much, Maria Silvestre Cabrera. So I now turn to the Gearing Roles Sabancı University team, which is made up of myself, Ayşe Kadul, and İlayda Eseova. Will tell you briefly why this conference is important for us and what you should be expecting in the coming days. Ayşe.
Yes, thank you so much. It was really fantastic to listen to you all and to hear the excitement, the passion, and the commitment that you're all putting into this work that is really, I think, shaping the planet and the future for us all. So when we, as the Gearing Roles team of scholars and educators from 8 countries across Europe, decided to hold the 2nd annual conference on gender and leadership in November 2020, of course, we had no idea that a pandemic would be preventing us from physically coming together in Istanbul, nor that there will be close to 1,000 registrations for the online version of the conference from 30 different countries. So not only is the pandemic global, but the networks of solidarity and learning we're all weaving together as well. And I think that calls for celebration and reflection. So whether you are joining us on Zoom or via YouTube, a warm welcome to you all from Istanbul. As the interest in this conference shows, we're meeting at a historic moment of intense global conversations and change on gender and leadership in politics, in academia, in sports, in literature, in NGOs, basically everywhere. And despite ongoing challenges that we all face in different degrees, it is an exciting moment of harvesting the hard work of so many who have put their minds and hearts into transforming our institutions towards greater equality and inclusion. So I would like to start by expressing our deep gratitude to everyone who has paved this path for us all, starting from our great-grandmothers here in Istanbul, who campaigned for women's access to higher education in the 1910s during the last years of the Ottoman Empire, and were indeed successful in establishing a women's university in Istanbul in 1914 at the brink of the war. So a century later, we're still working on pushing the glass ceiling, but we know we're not alone. And we're heartened by the amazingly courageous and creative work that is being done globally, some of which we'll be able to share with one another in this conference. So as we, Guru, Ilayda, and I were preparing for this welcome, we asked ourselves this question: what do we find exciting about institutional change for gender equality? Because we do find it exciting. None of us are doing it out of duty or see it as a bureaucratic effort. And we would love to see your answers to this question as well. So we invite everyone to type their own sentence in chat or in the comment section on YouTube. We will be collecting these sentences coming from you all and putting them together anonymously as our collective statement for what we find exciting about institutionalizing gender equality. So let me share my answer, and then I will turn to Guru and Ilayda. I find institutional change for gender equality exciting because there's so much creativity and so much wisdom that is waiting to be voiced, cultivated, and shared. And I truly believe that our institutions and this planet need the wisdom, the unique, creative expression of each and every one of us. And for that, we need gender equality in an intersectional sense to be at the heart of our institutions. Guru.
I find institutional change for gender equality exciting because as much as we would like to think that inequality is accidental, coincidental, stems from a few biased persons, many inequalities are structural and deeply entrenched, and with good institutional structures and guiding norms, good practices and ethical behavior become habitual. Ilayda?
I find institutional change for gender equality exciting because when taken into action, it shows that at our schools and workplaces, we are not people who happen to be coming to the same place every day just to make a living and then go back to immerse ourselves in personal struggles in our private lives, but we are fellow human beings who care about each other's well-being and rights, and we are actually willing to work in solidarity for each other.
That's great. So we would like to invite all of you to write your own sentences and share via chat or comments on YouTube, and we will put them all together. So we hope that in all of our conversations in the coming days, we will be tapping into this space of finding joy and excitement. I thought I was disconnected, but I guess it's working well. So tapping into the space of finding joy and excitement in institutional change for gender equality, which only happens when there are people who put their passion, commitment, and hard work into making it happen, and when they do it together. And talking about coming together and for institutional and transformative change, As Julia mentioned, just 2 days ago, Kamala Harris was elected as the Vice President of the United States of America, as the first woman, the first person of color, the first Black American, and the first Indian American, South Asian American to hold that office. So I'm particularly excited to hear Mangala Subramaniam, who is joining us from Purdue University, who has worked on the intersections of gender, caste, race, and class in both India and the US for decades, and has dedicated her life to gender equality in institutions with her research and activism. And it's really the kind of work that she and other scholars and activists have been tirelessly doing for years that we are living this historic moment. It's not only historic for the US, of course, it has implications for all of us globally. So Guru will be saying more about our wonderful former president and Dean Ayşe Kadul, who will be joining the conversation with Mangala Subramaniam and Professor Subramaniam herself. What we would like to do now is to start going over the program for the next couple of days. And I will first turn to İlayda, who will be leading a very creative effort with university students from different countries to punch in more entries into Wikipedia of women and LGBTIs. İlayda.
Thank you. So it seems to me that we take spaces of democratic participation for granted very easily. Personally, I wouldn't think Wikipedia was one of the trenches we needed to defend in the name of freedom of information. But as unbelievable as it sounds, Wikipedia was blocked in Turkey in 2017 and stayed so until January 2020. I'm glad we can access this 5th most popular website in the world from Turkey now. But I'm not sure if we're doing enough to reclaim our power to create and disseminate knowledge through a tool like Wikipedia or other digital platforms. Digital media is a crucial field of action, not only for data monopolies, but also for citizens, and particularly for youth. And being so much inspired by my peers from all around the world, the way they take into hand social issues they care about, become activists, politicians, academics, civil society members, and social entrepreneurs. I believed organizing a digital activism marathon for editing Wikipedia could inspire many young people to discover more of what digital media can mean. On behalf of my team, I'm inviting all the university students here to attend this event tomorrow.
Yes, it is indeed a very exciting effort that we think may not be confined to this conference. We hope that more and more people, especially young people, will be engaged in this form of digital feminist activism to include more people, more women and LGBTI leaders in Wikipedia. So tomorrow, after this event, which is specifically for university students, we have 2 panels that will focus on Turkey. Of course, if we were holding this conference in Istanbul, we would actually be meeting this amazing group of people. The first panel will concentrate on the work that is being done at the in civil society and in urban governance by people who are leaders themselves, inspiring leaders themselves, and who are opening platforms for other women and LGBTIs to come together and to work towards transformative change. So in the first panel, we have a wonderful group of people representing different feminist and LGBTI organizations working in different fields. And Ayşe Gülbayar from the Sabancı Foundation has a great set of questions to ask them. I'm personally very much looking forward to this conversation. Hatice Temir will be joining us from Yüksekova, from the eastern end of Turkey, and we will have, I'm sure, a very rich conversation. One of the very, I think, important characteristics of the Gearing Roles project is that it is built on learning from the wisdom of others, from people working in local government, in civil society, as well as in other universities and other institutions. And I would particularly like to commend the work that the European Commission is doing, everyone who's contributing to these projects, for encouraging people from these different projects to come together and to learn from one another. We are using the tools that have already been developed by other people who came before us and working together to co-create. So co-creation has been a central theme of Gearing Roles, and our wonderful colleagues from Yellow Window have equipped us with a whole set of tools to co-create together. And we have been blessed as the Sabancı Gearing Roles team to be in a wonderful company with our colleagues from other universities in Kadir Has, Özyeğin, Middle East Technical University, as well as other universities in Istanbul and Ankara, who have led similar projects before and have really shared their wisdom with us. So tomorrow we will have this panel of sister projects, as we call them, and we will be looking into what these European level projects have done in terms of helping transform our institutions and how we can act together for even more transformative change. So both of these panels will expand our horizons and will help us come together across institutions towards gender equality, making gender equality a reality in our lives. And I will pass the word now on to Guru, who will talk about the next day, November 11th.
Thank you. And the last day of the conference, we have two sessions devoted to leadership and gender again. Our colleagues in the first session, our colleagues John Pizarro Perez and Lera Garcia Fernandez from Deusto University will present the leadership gap analysis they've conducted. And then with the moderation of Inge Blachenberg, we will have a roundtable with leaders from each of the 6 GEP, Gender Equality Action Plan implementing institutions that are partnered to this project. We'll be discussing shared challenges and resistances and ways of overcoming them. As many have stressed, given the critical role of leaders in promoting positive change in institutions, we're so lucky that they have accepted our proposal to talk about their experiences. And in the second and final session of the conference, moderated by Yeşim Arat, we will have a chance first to listen to Melsa Ararat, Director of the Corporate Governance Forum at Sabancı University, to learn from her many years of experience in gender equality and diversity in decision-making. Then we'll have a roundtable with 5 inspiring academics, all of whom have played critical roles in promoting an equal institutional culture in their respective countries. In this session, we'll converse about actions and solidarities. That said, as we planned this conference, we wanted all of us to come together to think, reflect on, and discuss on the senses of leadership we imagine as agents of change for a just and equal society. And that is why, as the program shows, we look at leadership broadly and widely to include people in decision-making levels and positions, as well as those who are participants and drivers of change, students, academics, civil society agents, and all members of the research and education community. Before we move on to the second part of this session, to the keynote speech, I would like to take this opportunity to extend gratitude to those who have made this conference possible. We thank the European Commission, our policy officers. We thank the Gearing Roles partners and teams, particularly Maria Lopez Veloso from Deusto University, who's doing a remarkable job coordinating this project. We extend our thank yous to Sabancı University and to Sugender with its director and wonderful team of colleagues for hosting this conference. We thank the amazing interpretation team, Bahar Eriş, Ceren Bektaş, and Narin Koray Saka from the Thai conference, who will be with us translating throughout the conference. We thank the Wikimedia Turkey user group, and a special thanks goes to the organizing team, first and foremost to İlayda Eceova, who's been working so hard for days and weeks and months to make sure that everything runs smoothly, and to Oğuzcan Ok, Berfin Çek, Berfu Serçe, Fulya Kama, Begüm Acar, and Enis Demirer for assistance and support throughout planning and implementation. Finally, we extend our gratitude to, of course, all of you speakers, moderators, participants who so kindly agreed to participate in our conference and who registered for this 3-day-long journey on Zoom or watching us on YouTube. I stop here now to move on to the second part of this session. And I would like to make a reminder for all the speakers today and in the next few days, especially if you're reading your presentation, to please speak not very fast, let me say, not slowly, but not very fast, to help our translators. So let me introduce to you Ayşe Kadul, who has so generously agreed to introduce our keynote speaker and become a discussant in this session. Since its foundation 20 years ago, Sabancı University has had 2 women presidents, both of whom were interim presidents. Aisha Kadul is one of them, served as acting president in 2016 to 2018, and Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences from 2013 to 17. The second was Zehra Sayers in 2018, whom we'll get a chance to listen to in the very final session on Wednesday. Ayşe Kadul is a professor of political science at Sabancı University since 1998. She was a visiting scholar at Columbia University, Sakıp Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies during the 2019-2020 academic. I'm unmuted, right? Okay. Academic year. Okay, I lost track. And a fellow at Harvard University John F. Kennedy School of Government, Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, and a visiting scholar at Harvard University Minda de Gunzburg Center for European Studies between 2018 to 2020. Among many other memberships and posts, she is one of the advisors for the online network Free Speech Debate, a member of the advisory board of Columbia University Sakıp Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies, a member of an advisory group of Council of Europe, and has co-authored a report titled Living Together, Combining Diversity and Freedom in 21st Century Europe in 2011. Thank you very much. Ayşe Kadul, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm muted, right? Okay. Let me also begin by welcoming you to the second Gearing Roles International Conference with my thanks to Sugender at Sabancı University for all their detailed work for this. We are honored to have Professor Mangala Subramanian as our keynote speaker. Mangala Subramanian is a professor of sociology and Butler chair and director of the Susan Bulkeley Butler Center for Leadership Excellence. Since October 2019, she's also the elected state co-director of the American Council on Education Women's Network of Indiana, which is a national system of networks within each state with the goal of advancing and supporting women in higher education. At the Butler Center, she has actually started several key initiatives for faculty success, especially women faculty and faculty of underrepresented minorities. And one of the initiatives is called the Coaching and Resource Network for Assistant and Associate Professors, which is actually an initiative that is currently being replicated by the University of Texas at Austin. Mangala Subramanian is both in the academy, but also actively working for this cause. So I want to be able to combine both. Her research interests include gender and its intersections with race, ethnicity, caste, and class, social movements and transnational movements, higher education, of course, global politics, development, research methods, and South Asia. She has authored and co-edited a number of books. Now, in an effort to hear her remarks more, I will try to stop myself from listing her many publications. I will just mention her most recently published article that I have come across, which appeared in Inside Higher Ed in July 2020, with the title Women in Leadership, Challenges and Recommendations. She has served as a member of the editorial board of Gender in Society, a key scholarly sociological journal for gender-related research, and she's currently an associate editor of Social Problems, a top journal in sociology. Among her numerous awards is the Salute to Women, Woman of Distinction from the Greater Lafayette YWCA. She's an honoree. She has also received awards for her teaching at the department and college level. The fact that we are having this conference on an inspiring day after the election of Kamala Harris to the position of vice president in the US, first in US history, is indeed invaluable, since the first step in overcoming the difficulties that we're going to be voicing today is hope, really. Inspiration elevates hope. Well, some say it is a transitory feeling. I mean, it just, comes and goes, but, we are really at a high level today in terms of hope that we're feeling. And it is really a very necessary feeling that, since it actually allows us to breathe, as I just saw in the chat that one of our participants said, the answer to the question that Aisha Kadul was posing, because, it allows us to breathe, right? We can breathe in the midst of actually rising authoritarianism in the world. So without further ado, I will now leave the floor to Professor Professor Subramanian, and we're all actually impatient to hear her remarks, and I'm hoping afterwards we will be able to have a chat. So the floor is yours, Professor Subramanian.
Thank you so much, the former president of Sabancı University, Aisha Kadul, and everyone else who had opening remarks. I'm just going to take a minute to share my screen here. Is this viewable? Yeah? Thank you. Good evening for those of you from Europe, and good morning for those of you joining from the US end. I'm really honored to be following several speakers this morning, the tremendous remarks from the European Commission's Euthanasia Mongo, the Dean of Social Sciences at SU, Professor Bach, Julia Adak from SUGender, Aisha Altane, and I am extremely pleased to learn of the work of Gearing Roles. I've been looking through your website from the day I received the invitation. So thank you very much. I'm honored to be speaking at this second annual conference, which is extremely timely and I think extremely meaningful globally, gender and leadership in higher education and research. Okay, now I'm having trouble seeing my slides. Okay, I'm going to need some help here, I think.
What do you need us to do, Mangala?
Yes, I think he's fixed it, your technical person. Okay. Thank you. My keynote will comprise actually 4 main parts here. A brief introduction and a little bit about my own career trajectory, and then a framework for transformation of institutions of higher education. And then following that, some strategies for faculty members and leaders. And interwoven into those strategies would be some of my own experiences, as well as some of the initiatives and programs that have come through this center, so the Susan Buckley Butler Center for Leadership Excellence, or in short referred to as the Butler Center here at Purdue. This keynote material is drawn from a manuscript that is in progress, and hopefully this discussion will only enhance the quality of that manuscript. Let me begin with this very short case, and really quickly. The only woman faculty member of color resigned from a fairly important university committee after 2 meetings. This committee was intended to provide input for a survey to examine faculty satisfaction that was going to be undertaken by an outside agency. So it was a paid survey. When pressed by a committee member, by another committee member to explain her resignation, she elaborated and emphasized that what concerned her was decision-making processes, the lack of transparency, and lack of respect for knowledge and expertise that women of color typically face, very similar to what happens in classrooms. What do we take from this case? And here are 4 main points that I think are pertinent to institutional transformation as related to this keynote. The first is about the role of structure and processes. And I know in the remarks that preceded me, there were mentions of decision-making processes. We can create committees and task forces, but I think to be effective, you need to make sure that their processes are in place that are actually respected and honored. Theater structures, I would argue, lack transparency, meaning just the creation of a structure, because they often tend to place individual interests over that of the institution. It can decelerate institutional change. Second, considering my reference to the woman of color faculty member in the case, in the short case, I would say be cognizant of difference because it shapes different experiences, right? And it's extremely key for inclusive excellence, whose voices get heard, and I'll speak a little bit more about this in the framework as well. Third, recognize and value expertise and knowledge and the work that is needed to be done by faculty and by leaders for transformation. Dismissing expertise can be detrimental to transformation. And the 4th point here is from this case is about transparency in processes of representation and decision-making. Lack of transparency can breed distrust. Trust is central to thinking about change. It can breed skepticism, and it can challenge even implementing initiatives, or in this case, which I just briefly mentioned, is also about challenges to actually implementing what the committee intends to do. So perhaps having women in leadership positions can enable some of these 4 points that I'm referencing here. What do we know about leadership and representation in institutions? And I know there have been some references in these remarks, in these opening remarks. Let me begin a little bit with the US. In the 2016-17 academic year, the number or percentage of bachelor's degrees was 57% conferred to women. And women now compose half of the college educated workforce, right? But women hold the least senior administrative positions and are the lowest paid among higher ed administrators. This picture is starker when you think about women of color faculty. And here, when I'm talking about women of color, I'm talking about very broadly, looking at both race and ethnicity. The term BIPOC, if you've not heard of it, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, BIPOC, has become quite common in the US. There are both pros and cons to using that term where individual groups want their own identity, but also the kind of solidarity of these broader groups, including underrepresented minorities. So if you look at women of color in 2016, only 14% of higher ed administrators were racial or ethnic minorities. And just to remind you, this includes both men and women. If you were going to sift women out from that, it would be even lower. According to the ACE's College President Study 2017, 30% of the US college and university presidents are women, an increase of about 4 percentage points since 2011. But mind you that 30% includes all kinds of schools. The more elite schools, R1 institutions, or what are called Research 1 institutions in the US, you would see only about 11% of those leaders are actually women. Notably, some high-profile female presidential appointments among these elite or R1 institutions occurred recently. University of Louisville, University of Minnesota, Iowa State University, and Rochester. All of them have seen women presidents come into positions in the past about 2 to 3 years. Perhaps the recent protests for racial justice that have unfolded in the US more visibly, especially during the summer, will open opportunities for women of color. And especially, as has been repeatedly mentioned, following the election of the first woman of color vice president for the United States, Kamala Harris. What about European Union Association universities? What I could find in terms of the data, as of March 2017, in 47 countries, which are European Union Association members, only 12% of all rectors are female. In 2020, in another report, 15% is mentioned as female. But it varies across countries. There are some countries where the proportion of female rectors is above average, and in some, especially 20 countries, which do not have any female rectors at all. I know I'm using the term gender and female and male interchangeably. I'm using the terms that were used in the report. I myself think about gender as relational and as actually involving power relations. And yes, gender is a way of signifying relations of power and is visible in actually the way we think of the categories of sex. What may be the challenges that women face in rising to leadership positions, and why do we see such few women? First, underrepresentation, and not generally in leadership position. Women, and in this case, especially of women of color, are underrepresented in tenured and full professorships, which in turn limits the opportunities to advance into formal leadership positions at colleges and universities. Yet, we know from research and our own academic experience that qualified and ambitious women are definitely not in short supply. We know that, especially in the US, universities and the elite institutions, you need to become a full professor to be in an administrative position. Women are not simply denied top leadership opportunities at the culmination of a long career, but rather such opportunities seem to disappear at various points along their trajectories. And even when women attain leadership positions, we face challenges embedded within institutional structures and systems, and perhaps even individual mindsets that require transformative change. Third, the role of deep-seated networks, both for leadership positions as well as for research and research collaborations. They open very few opportunities for women because they are typically male and or white, and even if they are less than competent, men tend to get appointed to those positions or even be recognized for their research. Fourth, the stereotyping that occurs based on both gender and race. Compliance, not candor, combined with being deferential, reinforces the status quo, meaning no change and no transformation. The stereotypes are embedded in systems, in society, and within institutions, and it's going to require considerable effort by women and their allies to enable change. Women of color especially are isolated as they do not fit into white or male cliques and are yet more visibly scrutinized from a privileged lens, and oftentimes even critically reprimanded. Isolation is further exacerbated as the few women of color in leadership position lack networks for support or to utilize them as a sounding board. They become what we call token representatives. Women have networks too, not that they don't have networks, but it's not networks of the same kind as men have that open opportunities, because there are already very few women full professors and very few women who are in positions of power and leadership. And there is this much written about that as women move up the ladder, they tend to pull the ladder up with them, closing those opportunities or closing those networks. Considering this bleak picture, you may ask, how am I then, as a woman of color in an administrative position in a university in the US? A little bit about my own trajectory. I'm a first-generation immigrant to the US from South Asia, from India. I have tremendous family support, inspiring parents, very supportive siblings, and extended family who've always believed that anything is possible. My background also involves being trained as a social scientist, but also in other disciplines in my other degrees. My PhD is in sociology. My undergraduate degree happens to be in physics honors with mathematics, as well as an interdisciplinary degree in my master's, which is based on economics. So some of that social background, social science background, has shaped what I do in a leadership position, what I may even call out about meetings and they being gendered. It's also about the knowledge I bring to practices and how I do research, even in the higher education field. This is my first university level administrative position. I've had some exposure to administrative positions at the department and college level. Just prior to being appointed to this position, I was the College of Liberal Arts inaugural Dean's Faculty Fellow. And so I did have some bit of exposure, but I had neither thought about nor aspired to be in university administration or be in a leadership position. In this position, as the Butler Chair and the Director of the Butler Center, in these 3.5 years or so, my job has involved listening to faculty constraints, fears, needs, as well as successes and accomplishments. But I've learned to also recognize how different axes of difference, and here difference meaning gender, race, ethnicity, rank, age, and even disciplinary backgrounds that circumscribe all of the faculty members' lives and these structures which we are within. I've also learned to practice inclusivity by bringing different stakeholders to the table. Since the start of my term as the director in 2017, the events we've held and the initiatives we've announced have received tremendous response on this campus. It's made the center almost a pivotal institution on this campus. And we are fortunate that we are now doing things virtually in one sense. It allows for more people to participate. When we first started events in 2017, after I came in the fall of 2017, we had so many registrants that we often had trouble with rooms and room capacity as the fire marshal started following us and our events, so that we ensure safety in numbers in rooms. So the virtual kind of events have allowed for us to open registration much more widely. As another example, in practicing inclusivity through the summer, I've also led a group of 15 faculty to discuss diversity concerns. And it involved conversations with the provost over a period of 6 months. It has resulted in an advisory committee on diversity and inclusion being chaired by the provost. It was not easy. I was balancing between a group of faculty and their trust, and on the one side, and the provost on the other side. But I think in the interest of broader inclusivity, I think this committee looks very promising. In fact, as I speak here today to all of you, the second meeting of this committee is currently in progress. This position has also provided me opportunities to learn, interacting with other faculty members and leaders, and also by attending external professional development programs made possible through university support. Additionally, I've learned the importance of being responsive and prompt. As a colleague, an assistant professor reminded me, timeliness helps to build trust. I also look at myself actually as an outsider within in two different ways, in terms of my own demographic background as a woman faculty member of color and immigrant who is in university administration. There are committees I'm on where I'll probably be the sole woman of color faculty member. I also look at the center as being an outsider in the structure of leadership and yet within. It belongs in the office of the provost, and yet it has been able to function somewhat independently. From this current vantage position, it is in a unique position that the center connects with faculty. I combine faculty matters with diversity and inclusion. They are integrated. I've built relationships of trust, both one-on-one, as well as based on initiatives and connecting through them. But I've also seen a gap in the broader holistic picture of vision in the decision-making processes that occur at the upper echelons of leadership of universities. And I've also seen a gap in kind of understanding the type of work or labor that many of us women engage in trying to support, understand, and allow women the spaces to be able to find ways to succeed. During these past 3.5 years, I've also seen shifts in the structure and balance of relationships over time with individuals and units, some of them for the good, some of them for the not so good. I've benefited from the role of an experienced outside mentor, particularly for administration and leadership role, made possible again by the provost of the university. Despite being in this position for 3.5 years, I find it difficult to perceive myself as a leader, primarily because my aim has been to make a difference for faculty, considering my own experiences as a faculty member in the US, as well as a graduate student going through the processes and actually competing in the job market. Giving you these two parts, the introduction on leadership and my own trajectory, here is a framework that I want to put forth, thinking about leadership, role of leadership, and transformation. Let me give you a minute here to look at this. There are several elements in this framework that I will go over. First is leadership. I think it's extremely important for leaders to be clear about expectations, enable independence of units, especially at the university level as you look down on units, but also require interdependence for a cohesive vision, right? Not just merely of individuals, but of units. I think there would be more success in transformation or possibilities for change once you think about the interdependence and working cohesively. It requires clear goals. The leadership style in terms of the level and type, and therefore the work that leaders do, including being responsive, requires transparency and rejection of hidden agendas, in order to create broader spaces of inclusion on campus to transform institutions. The necessity for inclusionary work is even more prominent during these times of the COVID-19 crisis that all of us in higher education are facing. Emphasizing and practicing inclusion will bring diverse lenses and insights into decision-making processes. It also requires recognizing the challenges that women of color actually experience to speak up, considering the risks of retribution or retaliation. And they often actually are dealing with climates within smaller units that can be a challenge to their own successes. And I'm talking here not just of leaders, I'm talking here of assistants and associate professors. And I know in my introduction, the role of the coaching and resource network was mentioned. It's been a highlight of one of the initiatives we opened in 2019. And as we announced this to assistants and associate professors, it was completely full. I should add here that the coaching and resource network comprises of full professors. Right now, 21 of them. In the first instance, when we were trying to get this together with 20 full professors, I did not know how they would react or respond when I invited them. They are from across disciplines, across colleges of this very large university. 15 of the 18 of them responded within 24 hours, asking, what can I do? What would you like me to do? What is the next step? And it was extremely heartening to see how successful women in research and in leadership positions were willing to kind of open doors and opportunities for women in the lower ranks to be able to move up, right? And that's what we want to see. So in the case of the role of CRN, it's not primarily mentoring for research. It is more about being a coach and a sponsor that is building confidence in assistants and associate professors. It is open to all, but largely women and women of color have used the initiative. And it's also to kind of build ways and strategies for assistants and associates to navigate difficult circumstances as they are trying to do their research, become known, and actually be recognized for their work. The work itself, I think I talk about work as being both gendered and racialized. And I think about 3 types of work in this framework: routine work as a leader, intellectual work, and emotional work. And here I'm referring to those in leadership positions. Institutional transformation entails doing the work of leadership. This work is about the ability to relate to and understand experiences different from one's own, which involves intellectual and emotional labor. Such labor is essential for being creative to develop initiatives, programs, and policies. Advising and mentoring women of color faculty who face challenges or even climate in departments that are far from conducive to doing research, writing, or teaching involves emotional labor. It is something like care work. This labor, emotional and intellectual, includes empathetic listening and finding ways to mitigate experiences involving the intersections of sexism and racism and ethnocentrism. I know this work, emotional and intellectual labor, involves enormous time and effort. Such emotional labor is rarely recognized or rewarded because it cannot be tangibly measured. It cannot be listed on a CV. I've not listed it despite the fact that I know for 3.5 years, a lot of my time and energy has been spent positively in this empathetic listening and supporting. Inclusive excellence, which is central to this framework, is about representation. We know that. It's about bringing voices to the table. We know that. But it's also about the inclination to move those voices to action. How do we incorporate those voices and those understandings into the decisions we make? There are few women in leadership positions, but even when women faculty are added to committees, where are their voices? whose voices are heard, and which voices actually get incorporated in action. What I see is not typically women. And so the kinds of transformations institutions are looking to bring about may not always be gender sensitive. And therefore the work we all do and the importance of gearing roles should be extremely clear from this kind of a setting and structure that we are trying to change and transform. I think there's a fine line between transparency and confidentiality. And I say this because a lot of leaders hide behind confidentiality when they think about decision-making processes. Lack of transparency, there's greater power exerted by selective individual administrators. It can disrupt decision-making processes and can lead to marginalizing or dismissing expertise. Overall, it can affect institutional transformation. Transparency actually allows for trust and trusting relationships to actually be built, which is reciprocal, and it can kind of sometimes address challenges that come with trying to bring about transformation. There's no doubt, no matter how we look at this framework, there are going to be struggles within structures, within units, and in broadly across units. And I think these structures, changing them requires, and as one of the speakers mentioned before me, both the political and the technical kind of attention that it needs. These assessments of programs and initiatives as we do them, how do we bring about both accountability, that is by using rubrics, including not just assessment of individuals, but assessment of units, assessment of programs and initiatives, but make them transparent, right? So even though I'm talking about these ideas, there's a thread that links through all of them. I want to talk a little bit about work here because that is key to what women in leadership positions do, but also what women faculty who are in full professorships generally are called upon to do. As I said, I see three different types of work that's being done. Although I've separated them here, obviously they overlap. Think about the types of work that people in leadership positions do and who does them and how is it related to power and recognition, right? Routine work, women typically are fewer in leadership positions, so you see more men doing those routine works. It actually reinforces power because they have access to information, especially when there is lack of transparency. Intellectual labor is done by both men and women, but yet the intellectual work of the men and their expertise and knowledge is always more visible, whether you are looking at it from a leadership position, whether you're looking at it from a perspective of committees, right? And that work of men is very well recognized. Their accomplishments are known. When you look at emotional labor, the support and care work that women engage in, it's done predominantly by women and women of color. You know, recently, just about 2 weeks back, a department head here at Purdue, a woman of color, told me something like, faculty come and speak with me about the challenges and concerns during the COVID-19, looking for support, which takes a lot of time. I'm sure they'd not do this with a male head, right? So even the calling upon or the addressing of the support, that the reliance on women and the dependency on women to do this, but yet it connotes very less power and it's never recognized, right? I'm not saying that it is inappropriate to engage in emotional labor. What I'm saying is that such non-measurable work of support and care needs to be visibly recognized, overtly recognized, so that power flows to those people as well. There can be, of course, combinations of these types of work. And what I'm saying is that all types of work are done probably by men and women, but I'm talking here of what is most typical that we see in universities. What do the intersections of type of work and transformation result in for individuals and institutions? If you think of institutions as fields or spaces within which different types of work is occurring, one can try to understand this matrix a little better. I'm going to go from the bottom up. So emotional labor, primarily done by women and women of color. At the individual level, the transformation, it's partially effective, right? Because women in lower ranks, assistants or associates, or at the unit level leadership positions are looking for that kind of support for confidence building, encouragement, and even affirmation, as I will talk about in the strategies, right? It allows for the psychological security that they are looking for to be successful. At the institutional level, it's very dispersed because emotional labor is not recognized, right? It's not uniformly spread across the institution, perhaps because men don't do it or don't need it, right? Or don't need to specify it or amplify it. So at the institutional level, you don't see an uniform impact of this kind of emotional labor for transformation. The intellectual work that I look at the individual level as being segmented, meaning divisions or sections by gender. Some women in some disciplines may get recognized and may be able to transform things in their own disciplines at an individual level. At an institutional level, it is about concentration of power, right? When you see men's intellectual power being recognized, being visible, being rewarded, with awards at the university level or more broadly, even nationally, you see this greater level of power. And when it is leaders and their intellectual power, you see a greater hegemony of this happening in institutions. Concentration of power is never really amiable for change of transformation of institutions. And the topmost, the routine work, individual, the basic functions, work that women do. So as being in a position, leadership position, I do routine work. My routine work involves basic functions, just like men do. But because there are more number of men in positions of power and authority, they are able to maintain the status quo of institutions with routine work, right? Because of the kinds of information they have access to, and the push for change is actually negated, or the resistance for change comes from the other side. Maybe sometimes overtly, but most times very covertly, invisible, not very visible ways. So if you look at these combinations of how you think about transformation, you need some ways in which you're recognizing the invisible work to make it more effective, less dispersed, but also in some ways ensuring some deconcentration of power that allows more voices to come in to kind of think about what forms of transformation to kind of push for and accomplish. Coming to the last part of my talk, what do we do to accomplish transformation? First, strategies for faculty members who may not be in leadership position. Aim to get promoted, become a full professor, get your research recognized. And I think the dean put it very well when she was talking about the importance of getting known for your research. Try to access resources. Since the spring of 2019, the Butler Center has started the Associates Conference, or a conference for associates, this March 4th and 5th. And I will share the flyer happily with the Gearing Roles team to disseminate. We will have a virtual conference for associate professors. And for the first time this March, we will be opening it to those from outside Purdue. So this will be our third annual conference for associate professors. The goal of this conference is to provide resources for associates, for them to be actually heard, but also to allow them to network more broadly so that full professors can advocate for them, get their work known, sponsor them in certain ways. And that's what the Coaching and Resource Network does as well. Engage in building confidence, affirmation. affirm each other's viewpoints, research, ideas, what is constructive and what is put forth by women and women of color. This may be in open spaces, in conferences, and especially in committees and within units. This kind of affirmation, especially when sometimes women's ideas or constructive thoughts about how to move forward often get marginalized in mixed committees. Learn to speak up. And I put Barris in parentheses because he has a terrific article, a neurosurgeon, which appeared in the science journal called Nature. And it's titled, Does Gender Matter? Right? And he talks about the need for speaking up, especially those in positions of power and authority. You can afford to take that risk, very unlike assistants or associates. And be persistent, don't give up. Look for role models and seek out diverse faculty role models. This may highlight emotional labor and why it's important. Get it recognized, it contributes to change, and it can enable inclusive excellence and perhaps become more visible and less dispersed within an institution in itself. Even the intellectual labor of women can become prominent and diminish the hegemonic power of men in leadership positions if people use role models, speak up, and affirm with each other. Build alliances across levels. Even use men as allies and advocates. What I didn't mention earlier is that the coaching and resource network includes men in the network, that is male full professors. We open up workshops for them so that they are able to kind of advise and work with women assistants and women associates. As a rule, I acknowledge that the primary mission of the Butler Center is focused on the success of women faculty and underrepresented minorities. But I have opened most initiatives very broadly, largely believing that gender is relational. We can't do this with women alone. We need men as allies and as advocates. And so I even altered for the first time this year the title of the conference for assistant professors, which used to be called the Conference for Pre-Tenure Women. I called it the Conference for Assistant Professors because I wanted to bring male faculty members to hear what women faculty face as challenges and what they could probably do to change gender relations on this campus. As a unit, the Butler Center has been partnering with other units, the Advanced Center for Faculty Success, with colleges. And I think this partnering also brings visibility to how to think about women's success. Thirdly, I would say rely on research and evidence. I think data and research are extremely important. And I know it's a critical component and dimension of gearing roles. It allows us to unravel challenges and open possibilities, right? The rigorous form of research and systematic data analysis provides us a lot of insights in terms of where to go from here. We are doing assessments of the coaching and resource network. We are looking at its impacts, and we will be continuing to do this. And we would be doing the same for other initiatives. We get a regular feedback survey on the Assistants Conference, Associates Conference, and I start responding to it in the following year or to think about initiatives or new forms of support. We've also created a working paper series in order to kind of find a way for documenting research. This is available on our website. It is free and open. Anyone can access it. And I think it provides both reflexive kinds of articles of experiences of faculty members and strategies that they are looking for change, as well as data-driven pieces. Our most recent issue was a special issue on higher education and COVID-19. And some of the articles in there are eye-opening in terms of what women of color faculty, for instance, faced teaching online for the first time and how students reacted in giving them their teaching evaluations, right? So there's this also this honing in of research that is happening through the center. A most recent initiative is best practices tools. It's partially research driven, but it is also intended to find input for policy making at the institution level, right? These best practices tools, the first one is already posted on the Butler Center website. It is titled Documenting the Impact of COVID-19 for Faculty, Tenure Track and Tenured. And this emerged partly as I heard faculty talking to me about the challenges that they are facing in continuing their research during COVID-19. How will they be evaluated? Would I be tenured? How would this play into my evaluation and assessment through the next 4 or 5 years? Because COVID-19 has impacted faculty, not just for this period during the time of the crisis, but it's going to have a continuing impact over the next 4 or 5 years. This first best practice tool, just this morning, I heard from the provost that tool number 1, a new policy is being drafted on the documentation. I've already disseminated the tool, but a more formal policy is being drafted to be sent out. I will be seeing that draft policy soon. Strategies for leaders. Enable independence of units, especially university level leadership administrators, but also require interdependence, because without an interdependence, you never articulate a cohesive vision, right? And I'm sure those of you in gearing roles are seeing this. You have multiple units, you have in fact multiple institutions across countries working together. That interdependence is important, not only for this cohesive vision and goals, but actually for bringing forth the challenges that women faculty face. Right. I would also recommend to leaders to create some core groups, right? A core group of faculty that is knowledgeable with ties to these various constituencies. These constituencies meaning faculty or staff or students, right? That will allow for information to flow, and that is then creates this responsive leadership, right? I would also talk about being transparent, again, balancing it with confidentiality and demanding it of other units. And the accountability, that is building rubrics. And it's different from talking about interference or not wanting to interfere or not wanting to micromanage. And that's not what I'm referring to in the accountability. I'm talking about these broader goals, right? Which is where assessment and research can play a role. Leaders should think of being sponsors and mentors, right? Sponsoring. And if you've not heard of Sylvia Hewlett's work, she talks about being a better leader by investing in talented others. Barris mentions a great deal of hallway mentoring occurs for young women, but not so much for women and minorities, right? It's a point to think about role models for others to consider leadership positions. Right? Point them out. Here are people who have accomplished in research, if you're thinking on that front, or if you're thinking of administrative leadership. Ensure diversity in leadership roles. Start building pool of diverse leaders. And I'm sure that would be something that gearing roles may be thinking about. And again, affirm the work of women, especially those of color leaders. It builds confidence and credibility. Enable inclusive excellence. Don't rely on the same suspects to fulfill diversity commitments. There's an interesting article available on diverseeducation.com that refers to these usual suspects. That is the same women of color serving on committees or fulfilling diversity commitments. What it does, it kind of prevents new ideas, new thoughts, new mechanisms coming into the picture. So try to bring in different voices, right? Also think about open searches for top leadership position, right? Oftentimes it's bypassed and people pick someone from their own networks, typically male cliques. And so think about what open searches may bring to the table. When you think of inclusive excellence in committees as a leader, recognize the hesitancy of some people to speak up, especially women and women of color. They may not articulate their concerns and challenges. And finally, as a leader, talk about how you can address rude comments directed at women or things, especially the talking over of women in committees and in meetings, please call them out as a leader. Coming to the final slide here. Think about the concept of useful failures as a leader. Some of these failures may be excusable, some of them not. But even in those inexcusable failures, and especially the excusable ones, think about what you may have learned and what you may do differently under similar circumstances in the future. As a leader, think about rewarding emotional and intellectual labor. I just talked to you a little bit about the best practices tool. Tool number 2 actually is focused on support and recognition and actually processes for annual evaluation. We are just finalizing that tool that will then feed into a second policy document. In that, I actually talk about awards during the time of COVID-19 to recognize faculty who have engaged in emotional labor. And one way to make it visible and make it more acceptable as a form of labor that is necessary and essential. As a leader, recognize and bring expertise and knowledge to decision-making processes. Don't marginalize it. I also already mentioned to you the working paper series and the need for evidence or data. I use the word democratizing data here because information is power. A lot of institutions hold data or hold information, making it very difficult for faculty or leaders to access that data or analyze it. And I think that democratizing data is about enabling those kinds of analyses that bring new perspectives about the data analyses or new ways of thinking of strategies that can address issues that especially women and women of color face. How do we think about challenges and recommendations for leaders? What kinds of questions can we ask as leaders? I draw on some of the questions from my Inside Higher Ed co-authored article with Christina Alcade, and we are developing some of this in a forthcoming edited collection, which is going to focus on leadership in higher education. It's primarily focused on the US, but the book series for which we are co-editors is looking for proposals from across the world. So whoever is on this conference, please look up this call for book proposals, which is on the Butler Center websites. So think about the kinds of questions you ask. How are women represented? How are different kinds of groups represented? Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous women. The kinds of groups may differ across countries. How is the labor, the work done by women leaders and women of color recognized or compensated, right? How do we begin to make awards, but also compensate them? How can women of color leaders be considered capable of moving up the ranks and appointed to formal positions of power and authority? What forms of mentorships are available to them? Can we send them for professional development programs, especially those who are interested in or have the abilities and skills to enter these leadership positions? Both of the programs that I attended in 2019 and 2019-2020, sponsored by the provost, one at Harvard and the other, the HERS leadership programs, were immensely helpful for me to not only connect with other kinds of leaders across campuses and across universities, but also to learn from them. I'm going to end here with acknowledgements. Thanks to the Gearing Roles team, Aisha Altine, Ilaida Ova, Gulru Goke, Maria Beloso, and the entire Gearing Rules team for organizing this much needed conference. I want to put forth an offer to you that you can think about. The Butler Center would be happy to collaborate with Gearing Rules in terms of replicating any of our initiatives and or collaborating on projects. So do let me know if there is interest on that front. I want to thank Susan Butler, after whom the center is named. The center is extremely well resourced because of her endowments in the millions. She is still around, not here. She lives in Illinois, and she continues to be curious about the center's activity and keeps acknowledging its successes. She is always in touch with me. I'm very grateful to Jay Ackridge, the Provost and Chief Diversity Officer of Purdue, for his support, and which has allowed and enabled the center to do the work that we've done this far. I also want to thank him for his comments on these, on my remarks and the slides for this keynote. I appreciate the guidance and realistic advice and support from Teresa Sullivan, the President Emerita of the University of Virginia, who is my mentor on the administrative side since the spring of 2019. I want to acknowledge the time and commitment of Purdue's faculty, including some heads and deans, who've been allies, supporters, and advisors. I know a few of them had tried to register for this conference, and they know who they are. Thanks to Purdue's faculty for engaging in the center's initiatives. And finally, the tremendous group of accomplished women in the ACE Women's Network of Indiana, for which I'm the state co-director, along with Kathy Gibson. These accomplished women from across institutions are an amazing source of support. We did our first set of events this fall, town hall series around higher education and COVID-19. It was amazingly successful. And we actually have a leadership conference coming up in April through this network. Here are some selected references to the talk. And thank you so much for your time and for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mangala. I'm just want to make a short announcement. Thank you so much for this wonderful speech. I'm asking for those of you who can stay a little longer, can we extend our session for half an hour to have time for discussion and some questions from the audience, if it's okay for everyone? If those of you who have to leave, of course, you have to leave. And I'm also asking those of you who would like to be in the picture, or the group picture, to turn on your cameras, because our friends from Sugender will be taking some screenshots. Ayşe Hocam, now the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Guru. I was about to ask whether we can go a little over time, so apparently we can. Thank you, Professor Subramanian. If I can call you Mangala, I'm Ayşe. We both have difficult last names, so let's just make it easy, if it's okay with you.
Absolutely, no problem.
Great, great. Okay, Mangala, I really thank you very much for your remarks. I also want to thank you for really all the effort that you're putting into this, into this larger cause of gender equality, really, that we're all concerned with. As you said, at some point you said knowledge is power, information is power. And really, I mean, we need to have this information, and then share it. And then, we can find mechanisms perhaps to deal with it. Now, I think we face two fundamental challenges in our times. One, of course, being the pandemic that you alluded to, in your keynote talk. And the other, perhaps something that we did not talk about much, is these what we call new authoritarian regimes, and the state of the academy, and the state of course, the women academics in such regimes. So let me start with the pandemic, since you have already alluded to it. We already know, and we saw this very clearly in your presentation, that women basically have, if they have any, have the least senior administrative positions and are the lowest paid among the, the administrators. I mean, you portrayed it very clearly in the US context, in Europe. So earlier research basically confirms that women academics carry large teaching burdens with relatively little time for research and publication compared with their male colleagues, many of whom do not carry equivalent domestic responsibilities, something that our dean also alluded to. Now, with the onset of the pandemic, we were kind of fearing that this is going to get worse and this is going to make life actually very difficult, especially for women academics. And I actually came across a study by one international academic publisher, De Gruyter, actually. They conducted research, big research with 3,200 scholarly authors. And the research was conducted in May 2020 across 80 countries. Basically, it reveals that, the pandemic basically had left authors with less time for their research, but they also uncovered a worrying trend that female academics, and those with caring responsibilities were actually struggling the most. So there is actually, when they looked at the submissions, they actually see now more submissions by male authors who basically think that they're actually happier in lockdown situations, apparently. Male academics, express actually unhappiness about being in the lockdown situation because they can actually be more productive. And this is also not something that they say really, but that is also visible, at least in this one study, that the submissions by male scholarly authors have apparently increased because they can see actually the gender, not the later stages, but the editors can see that. So one academic, for instance, who wrote in Nature towards the end of April 2020, raised the problems being faced by women. It was a very genuinely written piece. She said that, she actually had seen more sunrises during the pandemic than she ever did, her entire life. As she puts it, silence and concentration are actually pivotal for my thinking, she says, and teaching. And we can all relate to that, really. She records her classes, and it seems the only time she can do that is when her 2-year-old son is asleep, which is really, early, they call the wee hours of the night. So, there are obviously differences, and, there's all this already work going on for gender equality, but this is really creating a new obstacle in our lives. So do you fear that, these developments will jeopardize, some of the gains over the years? Is it possible to actually come up with new mechanisms for basically, keeping in mind this idea of, being a caregiver, really, caregiving, not just, for children, but also usually for elderly. And, this is something that usually women do, whether they're academics or not. So how can this be integrated into the debate, especially with the onset of the pandemic? Or, will the life go on as if, it isn't there, because it's like the elephant in the room, really? With the authoritarian regimes, if I can, telescope them into one, question. I mean, I could refer to the spirit of our times as, authoritarian. I use the expression authoritarian zeitgeist. My actually research is on new authoritarian regimes. And these are regimes that are distinguished by virtue of using democratic institutions, really. The new authoritarian regimes are actually quite different from the military regimes, of 20 years ago. They actually use democratic institutions. They usually come to power through elections and then engage in this process of what we call authoritarianization. So it's not really a coup d'etat, a sudden arrival of an authoritarian regime, but it's a slow one. And the use of democratic institutions, and also basically using the executive branch of government over the others, the legislative and the judiciary, and basically making it more dominant, engaging in changes that will institutional changes that will make it more dominant. Since they use democratic institutions, they survive quite a long time. And we see such regimes or such regime attributes, even in states that are members of the European Union. In Poland, in Hungary, we see that. One of the most important cases that we witnessed, for instance, was the pressures on Central European University, right? Among the most credible higher education institutions in the world, which was forced to relocate to Vienna. And so I have this feeling that women leaders in the academy, and I wonder what you think about this, women leaders in the academy may just be better equipped to deal with increasing pressures on their institutions, since women learn to deal with such imposing authority all their lives, really, right? Although in quite different forms. They learn to find spaces to breathe in the midst of a hegemonic, a masculine discourse and policies in all areas of life from very early on. But of course, it's also highly likely that women may not be appointed to key administrative positions in such regimes due to their tendency to constrain the lives of women within the family. I mean, these regimes actually uphold the traditional family. They glorify the traditional family. So, it may lead to less women actually in key administrative positions in higher education. So, given your referral to gender stereotypes, do you envision a different path actually in the struggle for leadership for women at a time of such, authoritarian zeitgeist in the world? And for women, really, this is expressed not just in institutional mechanisms, but as academics, as women academics, also in our daily lives. As they say, the devil is hidden in the details, right? Often, for instance, I've been teaching for probably over 30 years now. But often, and this seems to be increasing, that's why I'm going to mention this. I hear my students tell me that the courses that they're taking with male professors, for instance, are too demanding and difficult, right? So sometimes, they tell me that they cannot find the time, for instance, to do the readings for my class because they have to study for those more difficult courses. I see this as, that's why I said the devil is hidden in the details for women academics. This is, one moment really. There seems to be this assumption that because I'm nice and I will be nice to them and will not scare and use a threatening language, right? Such as, if you do not get your act together, you may fail this course kind of language, because I feel like my job is really, I'm there to teach them. I'm not there to threaten them or make myself important, but I'm there actually to teach them. But sometimes I feel like you feel pressured to succumb to that authoritarian discourse so that, you know, you are taken seriously? And what are we supposed to do with that? You know, this is a dilemma that, you know, I always wondered, how do we deal with that? So let me put it in the form of a better question. I mean, how, you know, do you think, for one thing, women are better equipped in fighting authoritarian trends in higher education, given, you know, their experiences in other realms of life? Or, I mean, do we need to go back to the basics, such as underlining that women are equal and individual citizens rather than constraining their existence within the family? I mean, since this is like a cloud, I mean, this authoritarian zeitgeist comes with its you know, emphasis on the traditional family. So it's yet another challenge in our lives, in addition, I think, to the pandemic. So pandemic and the authoritarian zeitgeist, you know, I mean, what are the new mechanisms that we can envision really to deal with these new challenges in our lives?
Great thoughts. And yes, no easy answer, right? It is very difficult. I mean, you're talking about these authoritarian kind of governments, and I will tell you, the past 1 year, the onslaught on higher education in the US by different executive orders seemed quite similar to that, to be honest, right? The last one being on this issue of no bias trainings, right? No trainings related to diversity, no training related to bias, and the executive order was issued. And, you know, the Butler Center offers gender bias workshops. Of course, we've not had one, as was not scheduled for this semester, it's scheduled for spring, but it reminds me of some of what you're saying, you know. And yes, between the pandemic and the kind of care work and support work, and how to challenge that to get women's productivity, which has been influenced and affected. And on the other hand, taking on governments that seem to target, right? And especially kind of issues related around gender that they target. Here are a couple of thoughts. On the COVID-19 crisis, I think the thought process you mentioned is similar to what we encountered here. And I know I explained to you the best practices tool that was born out of that. How do we begin to recognize? And in fact, if you open the tool online, you will see reference to the articles that you mentioned. This drop in submissions, and then more recent studies that have come out about this. And actually in the US, the National Academies of Science and Engineering just had a series of workshops. I wouldn't say workshops, I would say kind of presentations around key topics related to COVID-19. And actually to bring back or to address the gender imbalance over there. But I do think the onus is on institutions to make policy that recognizes what is happening to the records of women during this period of time, right? And yes, there have more submissions by men. I've seen that research that you were referring to, and it's very true in the US as well. But I think institutional leaders have to begin to start recognizing this and putting together ways and mechanisms of annual evaluation. So in order to ensure that they don't fall behind, right? Because it's very likely to happen if they don't. And one of the things that has come up in this tool number 2, which is not on our website yet, is this template that we are going to probably require our units to use. And that template is a very, to put it in vague line, very bland template, I would say. And bland meaning there are no specifics and no counting. There is no bean counting. There is no quality of journal. There are these caveats, which in the template that I have drafted, there are caveats that say, if the faculty member has documented based on tool 1, You know, having overseen a class which has 500 students in an introduction to physics or an introduction to chemistry or introduction to sociology class with even 5 graduate teaching assistants, that assistant professor must get some respite in the spring semester. But if they spend more than 50% of their time teaching as documented in the evaluation, it then gets kind of closed in terms of thinking about the contribution or the overall progress of that faculty member in that annual evaluation, right? So I do think the onus is tremendous on leaders. In fact, that's the reason I created the first best practice tool and also created the second one, which is now in draft form, right? So I think in the crisis part has also made visible child care, elderly care, as well as those who are more likely or more vulnerable to COVID-19, and how do we account for them, right? Some accommodations that get made, and you were referring to teaching here. So there's been a lot of guidelines that I wouldn't say in the first shot came out as was needed, but as it has been refined, at least over here, we've seen a little bit more of addressing of some of those concerns into kind of pushing out policy, but also where students don't adhere to policy, right, related to COVID-19 in classrooms, finding pathways for faculty members to actually bring that up without fear of retaliation or fearing assessments in their annual evaluations. So those pathways have all only more recently come about, not in March, April. We've done that in the past 2 months. So I do think the role of leadership, and here again, comes back to the point of inclusive excellence, right? Unless leaders bring to the table those kinds of faculty members and women or women in leadership positions to speak to these issues, they're not going to be able to address them in their documents. So there has been some move, and it's not just Purdue which is doing this. I know of other institutions because I've just been invited to speak on some panel around this documentation and the impact of COVID-19 on faculty. That's happening in January. On the authoritarian regimes, I think that's a much bigger challenge, because I will tell you, when the executive order came down on us about diversity trainings and bias trainings a month or so back, the first thing we did is a lot of us who are in kind of holding university administrative positions in other institutions, we started exchanging emails and about what to do and to get professional associations to start pushing back. So laying out statements, right? And in even other instances prior to that related to visa issues that the US government came down on, a couple of universities filed a lawsuit, and of course others joined others, signed on to that, like Purdue signed on to that legal or that lawsuit. I know it's much harder to assume an independent judiciary, right, in an authoritarian regime, but I think it is in the collective, the power lies in the collectives of these institutions. And I think that's where I see the significance of even these gearing roles, right? I mean, that you have partners across institutions and being able to build that collective interest to resist. I wouldn't say every resistance is going to lead to a success, but I think that collective resistance can be very, very meaningful, which is what we found, even in the US, in the case of both the visa issues that came up a few months back, as well as in these diversity training things, where institutions which have, all these institutions that have a person who has who's this liaison to government relations, all of them got together to start to push back, right? Explain what you mean. Are you meaning federal government? Are you meaning federal funds? Are you meaning grants? Are you meaning institutions generally, right? And I think that collective push or that collective resistance, the executive order has not been taken back, but yet it has made it more difficult for them to clarify from this collective resistance viewpoint. And I would kind of point to that. And as somebody who studies social movements, and resistance, I would say it's not just authoritarian regimes. Even democracies can become authoritarian at different points in time. And I think that's an important point to bear in mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we ending at 7:30? Is that what we agreed on, Guru? 7:30. Okay,
Yes.
so okay, then I will turn to actually one of the questions that I received here by Vasanta Subramanian. Who asks the question, how do you deal with hidden roadblocks? I think we have little time. Yes, we do.
It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question because we often think everything is very visible and open, and criteria for promotion or criteria for tenure in the US, and probably has other terminology in Turkey, are very straightforward. And the hidden hurdles are actually the hidden biases, right? How do we begin to address these hidden biases? And one way is educating. I've been, I should share this because I've been raising this issue within Purdue in itself and with our provost, saying that we tell assistants and associates what they need to put together for their documentation for tenure or promotion, but we never really tell the committees, which are called the primary committees in Purdue, how they should go about looking at a document, right? Or looking at a portfolio, or what we call the Form 36, right? And I think these hidden hurdles are, or hidden, which I think are hidden biases, I don't think you can do them at that point in time in a committee meeting. I think this needs long-term work of addressing biases. I just referenced the gender bias workshop we put together. It's a very basic module that we offer. We just piloted it at one department in August, in the Department of Pharmacy Practice, and we'll be holding additional sessions in the College of Health and Human Sciences, the first ones in spring. I do think it requires this long-term educating, but the long-term calling out. And even on these primary committees where there are women sitting, calling out those biases during discussions, not waiting for after and not waiting to discuss this subsequently, but kind of calling it out as bias. Saying this, I will tell you, I have a document attached to a current draft paper that I have, looking at promotion of associate professors to full, particularly women. It's data-driven. It's taken from a survey that was done at Purdue a few years back. And each of those issues, whether you talk about number of publications, quality of journals, you can take that for any candidate and make it negative or make it positive in a discussion, right? How do you ensure a discussion that is unbiased, but how do you also ensure criteria that are clear? And here I want to make a caveat here. When I talk about criteria for tenure and promotion of any kind, I do think we do not want numbers and bean counting, because then we put ourselves into a box. How do we make criteria that allows for recognition of what we call excellence? What is excellence? In what forms do we see that excellence? And I think as long as we are not clear about those forms of excellence, we'll continue to have these biases in discussions and issues in its own. I would be upfront with you, Purdue has had its own share of problems in promoting women and tenuring women. Over the years, we've done a better job of tenuring and promoting from assistant to associate. We've not done a great job of associate to full until about 2 years back. We've seen a larger number of women associates getting promoted to full. And it's because of a couple of reasons, at least I would attribute it to a couple of reasons. One is starting to call out the biases in discussions. And the second is actually seeking out allies and advocates, right? And it's also for top leadership who can call out unit heads saying, I see you putting forward cases of men repeatedly the past 3 years, large numbers of men to be promoted. Where are the women, right? Asking the question and starting that conversation. Where are the women? Can we look at their records? If their records are good, how come they've not been nominated for promotion? So there are, I think, multiple prongs, right? One from the leadership side, the other from the faculty side who may be in those disciplines, and the third being building allies, and the fourth being starting to address these biases in broad educational terms, even if it's targeting in that education the specific issue of promotion and tenure and so on. And I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach. There is no single solution to addressing those hidden hurdles or those hidden biases.
Okay, thank you very much, Mangala. You have generously shared your own experience and talked about how you actually tried to turn being an outsider within. As you explained them, demographically and structurally, from a likely disadvantage to a positive contribution, really. And I thought that was quite inspiring. I would like to end this, by saying, by reciprocating, the emphasis that you laid on trust and solidarity. Lately, in my old age, I have come to believe that I actually I want to underline respect actually for women rather than love or like. I mean, that goes actually for women and for LGBT. I think because even violence inflicted on women and LGBT is most often inflicted by people who claim to love them. So maybe we don't want that kind of love, and maybe we're more interested in respect as a prelude to gender equality. And I don't mean respect in the thick sense of the word, but just the basic respect as a prelude to gender equality. So I think we're going to end here. Maybe the organizers, would you like to add something? So I just want to convey my heartfelt, congratulations and thanks to you for sharing your experience with us. It's been invaluable to hear you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those questions. I'm sorry we didn't have a lot of time to get into Q&A during this session, but I'm hoping to attend a couple of your sessions over the next 2 days and probably learn a lot from all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mangala. Thank you so much, Ayşe Kadul. These were wonderful questions, very inspiring talks that we've listened to for the past couple of hours. And thanks to all participants for being here with us. And this is the end of this session. And thank you to our translators as well, of course. And we'll see you tomorrow. And we hope that we can continue conversing, discussing, building new solidarities in the coming 2 days.
Yes, thank you all for a really inspiring beginning. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.